name is Jeremy DeSilva. I go by Jerry. It's what friends and family call me. And I'm an associate professor of anthropology at Dartmouth College. Um, I'm what's called a paleoanthropologist. So anthropology is the study of humans, paleontology is the study of fossils, and I combine those. I'm a paleoanthropologist, so I study fossil humans. And in particular, I'm interested in the origins and the evolution of upright walking, and how we and our ancestors began moving on two legs, and then all of the implications of that, all the consequences for our anatomy and our behavior, of moving just on two legs rather than on all fours, because it's a very strange way for a mammal to move.
You have a very interesting story when you and Steve Toffel had a wonderful conversation about bears and humans.
Yeah, so when I say that humans are the only mammal that moves on two legs, what I mean by that is that we're the only mammal that always moves on two legs. That we don't, occasionally drop down on all fours and start, galloping. We just don't do that. Um, but that doesn't mean that other mammals can't occasionally stand up on their two legs and even move on two legs. And one of the animals that does that the most is the bear. And so there are, documented cases and video of bears occasionally standing on their two legs. And there's even quite a famous video of a bear in the New Jersey suburbs known as Petals, who had some injuries to his front limbs, they think, and he would stand and walk through people's yards on two legs, and he was videotaped, and the video went to YouTube, and it's been watched millions of times. So, when we walk on two legs, it's ordinary. I mean, it's pedestrian. We even have a word for it, right? It's just pedestrian. Um, when a bear does it or another animal does it, it's newsworthy. This Pedals the bear was on the CBS morning news. Um, so right, the circumstances under which bears move on two legs has been quite interesting to me. And so I had an opportunity through Osher to meet Steve Toffel and to participate and contribute to his class on black bears. And in addition to that, in this area, we have a celebrity, Ben Killam, who is a wildlife rehabilitator and works with injured and orphaned American black bears. Has been an extraordinary resource for me and my interest in black bears. In particular, what my students and I have done is we've visited his facility, and we've collected footprints on bears walking bipedally, walking on two legs. What we did was we enticed them with some syringes of maple syrup or some bowls of applesauce, and they would stand up on their two legs to try to get the food, and then walk through a muddy trackway that we had positioned in front of them. And then we would collect data on those footprints. We took lots of photographs. We even did 3D laser scans of those footprints. And the reason for that was there's this mysterious set of footprints at a famous footprint site in Africa, in Tanzania, known as Laetoli. This is one of the most famous fossil sites in the world. There are literally 20,000 footprints of all sorts of different animals that have been left in volcanic ash. And they're dated to about 3.5 million years old. And there are ancient human trackways made by Lucy species, Australopithecus afarensis. And they're beautiful, beautiful footprints made so long ago. And they tell us about the antiquity of walking, that it goes so far back in our past. But where bears come into the story is that there's another trackway at Laetoli made by something moving on two legs, but it doesn't look like the others. It's very odd. It's mysterious in its sort of geometry and the path by which this animal was moving. And so researchers wondered, maybe this is a bear. Maybe it was made by a bear. But nobody had actually really tested this hypothesis. And so we collected all these data on bears at Ben Killam's facility, and then compared them to these ancient footprints, and they don't match. It's one of those situations of like a Cinderella, a foot fitting the slipper. It doesn't. And so we don't think a bear made these prints. In fact, we think it was a different species of early human coexisting with Lucy's on the same landscape, but with a different kind of foot, with a more primitive ape-like foot, and walking in sort of a less efficient, more shuffling kind of manner. So we're pretty excited about that finding. It still hasn't been published, but we're working on that.
Also very special, I see, is your new book that just came out.
Right, it's called First Steps: How Upright Walking Made Us Human. Yeah, it's a labor of love. I've been, I've worked on that for several years. It compiles the research that I've done over the course of the last 15 years or so, but also the research that incredible research that many of my colleagues have been doing around the world, discovering fossils and then trying to make sense of them. I wanted to write a book about walking, in part because it really is an extraordinary way to move. And it sets the stage, I think, for all of the things that we celebrate as uniquely human. Our technological savviness, our ingenuity, our creativity, our large brains, our language, our diverse diets, the way we give birth, the way we parent our children. All of these things are slightly different in humans than they are in our close ape relatives. And to me, they all have their roots in this unique form of locomotion in upright walking. And yet we don't think about it very much. We walk around our worlds, we move from point A to point B without stopping to think about, without really looking at our legs and feet and thinking about how remarkable and how unusual this form of locomotion actually is. I like books that take something very ordinary and actually reveal how extraordinary it is. And so that was what I tried to do. What I tried to do in this book. Osher, and this goes back to Richard's initial question about what has attracted me to Osher and why I've been involved with it. So my background is in science education. I worked at the Boston Museum of Science for many years out of college, and I loved it there. Some of my my best years were at the Boston Museum of Science. My wife was a science educator there as well. It's where we met, and it was such a special place for me. It was so energizing that every day I could go into the science museum and not know what my conversations were going to be that day, because it wasn't a classroom. Whoever happened to come to the museum that day is who I would interact with. And so there would be kids, of course, lots of kids go to the science museum, but there would also be their parents and their grandparents. There would be people of all ages and all backgrounds. There would be people who didn't have a strong background in science, but were curious about it and would ask, questions. And then, maybe you'd be talking about the cardiovascular system to a kid, and right next to them is the chief cardiovascular surgeon at Mass General Hospital. Like, you have no idea who you happen to be talking to. And boy, when that happened, because it did, when that happened, you start peppering them with questions of, well, okay, you tell me about what a bypass really looks like. And so I loved it there. But it was also at the Science Museum that I discovered my passion for early human fossils and paleoanthropology. And I realized I wanted to do that for a living. I wanted to find fossils and study fossils and tell what we can about the human story from these fossils. And so that meant leaving the museum and going to graduate school. And I started at Boston University, and then my advisor, Laura McClatchy, brought me to the University of Michigan, where I got my PhD. And I've always sort of kept a relationship with science museums. And so the Boston Museum of Science surfaced again for me when I took a job at Boston University. And so it was right down the street. And I spent a lot of time giving talks at the museum and serving as an advisor. But then when I left Boston University and came to Dartmouth, um, one of the things I was so sad about was that I was leaving my science museum. But I'll never forget driving up 91 for the first time to the Upper Valley and getting to the exit, the exit to turn off for Hanover and Norwich, and seeing a big sign that said Museum of Science, this exit. And I thought, oh, there's a museum here. Of course, the Montshire Museum. And the Montshire Museum, for the last 6 years since I've been here, has been such a special place for me. It has allowed me to sort of scratch that itch of maintaining this connection with science education. But the other thing that has allowed me to do that, in addition to teaching at Dartmouth and teaching the classroom, and visiting elementary schools and middle schools around the area and talking to them about fossils and bones, has been Osher. Being able to talk with an educated audience, an interested audience about science and about, sometimes it's about bears, right? But I've also contributed to courses taught by Norman Miller on Africa, because I do a lot of my research in Africa. There was a course that was done on human origins and evolution that I contributed a number of lectures to as well. Most recently, Bonnie Fladung has done a course on wildlife, African wildlife, or I think it's a global wildlife, but she did a unit on Africa. And I came in and talked about my experience with chimpanzees in Western Uganda. Um, and I absolutely love this group because you're so curious and you're so informed. Um, and it's again sort of like the Museum of Science, where you'd be talking about the heart to the chief cardiovascular surgeon at Mass General. Talk to an Osher group, and you've got retired professors and retired heads of state, and people that just come from all sorts of amazing backgrounds, and I end up learning more than I think this quote unquote students do. So it ends up being a real conversation, which is what I really love about the program.
Thank you
Thanks,
very
Richard.
much.
Hey. All right.